Bryce Canyon National Park is located in southwest Utah. The canyon is actually not a canyon. It wasn't formed by erosion from a typical river or waterway. It was formed by headward erosion, and in the case of Bryce, it formed these giant, beautiful red and orange rock amphitheaters that you can look down upon from anywhere from 8,000 foot to 9,000 foot in elevation. From north to south, the amphitheaters stretch a little over 20 miles. There are areas with arches, fins, natural bridges, and the hoodoos. Within Bryce Canyon, there are hoodoos, and hoodoos are these large columns of weathered rocks. The hoodoos can be up to 200 foot high in some areas, and they also have open areas or windows, and you throw in some of the red and orange and occasionally white lines, and the sun hits those windows just right, you have a perfect picturesque view. So there's various areas throughout Bryce Canyon that have names that represent various views. Rainbow Point is the highest point at 9,105 foot. When at the highest point, you can see Aquarius Plateau, or the Pink Cliffs, Bryce Amphitheater, which is over 12 miles long itself, the Henry Mountains, Gray Cliffs, the Vermilion Cliffs, and the White Cliffs, which have a unique name, and I reveal at the end of the video what the unique name for the White Cliffs is. So you can see these by name. Some of the areas acquire them based on what their unique features are. There's Sunrise Point, Sunset Point, Queen's Garden, the Grand Staircase. There's also formations that have names such as Thor's Hammer, Silent City, the Wall of Windows, Boat Mesa, Sinking Ship, Fairview Point, and Pariah Point. You could go on. There's so many different individual names for the various sites and the features that you can find when walking about on the 50 plus miles of trails. So if you happen to reach around and touch a handful of some of the stone when you're up there walking or hiking, you'll sometimes feel that it's very solid and very firm. Or you'll see that the areas crumble within your fingers. And the entire area appears to be in a state of constant change. And while we were visiting, we learned this firsthand by trails being closed, such as collapses, landslides, and rock falls. We learned that when they do have these type of incidents, they check the terrain to see that it's stable and safe. Once they allow it to settle and they determine that it's continued to be safe, then they usually allow the path or trail to form as close to the area as possible with minimal deviation. Example, the Peekaboo Trail that we were going to follow was closed. It did reopen at a later date, and they merely have a trail form over the piles of the debris that had originally collapsed. So this is a frequent thing where they don't really get in there. It's not like they shovel the path clear and get everything cleared out for you again. They make sure things are stable, and then they leave it in as natural of a state as possible. They do not like to deviate because they wish to maintain the integrity of the vegetation with minimal impact. Bryce has been habitated for over 10,000 years now, at the least. The basket maker and Asazi indigenous tribes having lived in the area where artifacts were found south of the park. Other artifacts from Pueblo period Anasazi and Fremont culture were also found within the park. So they were in an area up to the 12th century. When those cultures departed the area, the Paiute people moved into the area. And it's from the Paiute oral tales surrounding the hoodoos that we find out what they thought of the hoodoos. The hoodoos were the legend people whom the trickster had turned to stone. Now, the trickster is sometimes referred to as the coyote, and the legend people were the people who all the stories came from. One older Paiute said that the hoodoos were named, and please forgive me on this one, Ankakawazawits, which was Paiute for red painted faces. I'm going to do some further research on that actual legend from the Paiute people because it seems like there has to be far more to it than the coyote turned them into stones and there they are. There has to be a very nice tale behind that, and I'd like to find the details of the origins and maybe read that to you guys. So Europeans first passed through this area briefly in the late 18th and early 19th century, but the Mormons were the first Europeans to visit and actually settle the area in about 1850. Or they tried to. They grazed cattle there mostly. A U.S. Major, John Powell, surveyed the area in 1872, developing very detailed maps, and upon these maps, they used them a great deal, and they used a lot of Paiute place names to represent the areas within Bryce. That was different from some of the usual trends that were experienced when people would name everything after themselves. But don't worry, someone else will come along and ruin that and pick up on that trend. The Mormons continued to try and graze cattle, and eventually the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints sent in Ebenezer Bryce to settle the area and see if it was suitable for a habitation. He was a skilled carpenter, and he soon had a small community there living with him. They lived in the Bryce Amphitheater. Now recall that the Bryce Amphitheater was the largest one that was about 12 miles long. They redirected some of the canals to guide water into the crops and to water the livestock. It was tough going, and eventually a drought coupled with overgrazing of vegetation leading to unstable soil and then flooding, all of this drove the remaining Paiute Native Americans out of the area. The settlers thought that they had better try to tame the area with water diversion channels, but no good. The Paiutes understood that some things were just not going to happen, and soon the settlers understood the futility of their attempts as well, and they left too. But not before they began calling everything in the area Bryce something, whether it's canyon, amphitheater, you get the point. Eventually, everyone left and moved, including the Bryce family. There were a few settlers that remained, but not very many at all. Now, Bryce Canyon remained off the maps of mainstay America for quite a while. In 1916 to 1918, some articles appeared in a railroad magazine that praised the beauty of the area, but there was no accommodations. There was no easy places to allow access for visiting. As with anything beautiful, some people did start to log the area and damage the vegetation from overgrazing of cattle began to show as well. But do not fear. The conservationists stepped in and said help. And before too much damage was done, in fact, within 5 years of those articles being in those magazines, someone had President Harding declare Bryce Canyon a national park status. Or was it? No, it was a national monument. Once some roadways were established going from amphitheater to peaks and points near and far, and upon establishing those roads and then building a Bryce Canyon Lodge for visitors, which, by the way, they did cut down trees locally and use locally sourced stone for that. But more people started visiting. And in 1923, it's a monument. In 24 and 25, roads equal more people, and Congress reaches out for more protection than the national monument status. So by 1928, the full land was shifted over into the federal government ownership, and the national park status was granted. And in 1934, the Civilian Conservation Corps, or the CCC, stepped in and they finished Rim Road, which is the scenic drive. With all the establishing of the park and how it came about out of the way, we're going to look at the actual park itself. When we were there, there was some 50 miles of hiking trails, and there's plenty of day hikes. And I hope that you're up for a change of plans too, because you can start a hike with all good intentions and have an overnight, unexpected rock slide that changes up these entire plans. Frequently, you'll end up crossing multiple different trails and somehow combining those all together to have a really good day hike. But plan for the unexpected. Please make sure you have a map of the area with you, because you're going to need it. Because I believe even a veteran of the region is going to tell you that once you get into those canyon amphitheaters, you'll start to see red and orange, pinyon and ponderosa pines everywhere when you crest a small rise and drop down again. It get very confusing. It's a wonderful experience as long as you're prepared and understand the challenges you'll be up against. Take the usual recommended precautions as well when you start to hike, especially make sure you have good boots and bring water. The terrain has a way of sapping the moisture from you, and it's just a hot, strange, hot and dry climate. I recall also the temperature changes can be wide, so layers, and bring a jacket. I saw a lot of people hiking without jackets, and whenever I look at the nighttime temperatures, I think they better reconsider that. So, what kind of trails are you going to be on? You can get a multi-day hiking permit if you want to walk the entire Under the Rim Trail, which is 23 miles, or there's a Rig Springs Loop, which is 9 miles, but it's also recommended as an overnighter. Or you could just pack in lots of day hikes, which is easy to do because you have trails by the name of Navajo, Peekaboo, Tower Bridge, Fairyland, Rim, Mossy Cave, Bristlecone. There's many trails. When hiking, besides all these amazing rock features and trails and formations, what else are we going to see? Well, there are basically 3 zones of forest, and I can tell you that each has a different kind of pine in it. There's a large variety of pines, and you will get a chance to see some very old trees, such as there's several Great Basin bristlecone pines that are over 1,600 years old, and I believe there is a couple 600-year-old fir trees as well, and you'll get to pass some of those on your actual hikes. What kind of wildlife are you going to see? I'm closing out this video by sharing a clip that I got of a cat versus a coyote showdown. There were 2 cats hanging out on the edge of a fence and a sorry raggedy-ass yote that wanted to eat those cats, and he was on the inside of the fence. At last check, before we had to leave, the coyote was deterred enough by our presence to leave the cats alone. So what type of wildlife can you enjoy other than the cat and the coyote? Well, Timber and Essie of Timber Adventures were resting at home during this trip, but they thank you for watching this video along with them. Please share our content. Buy a patch to support, like, comment, and I have a distinct question for our viewers at the end, and I'm hoping to see some answers in the comments. What other wildlife will you see? 150 plus species of birds. You have mule deer. Cougars are listed as coming to lower elevations in the winter, and that's not just the ones at the local watering hole. Coyotes, ground squirrels, marmots, foxes and badgers and porcupines, skunks, black bear, elk, bobcats, and you also have pronghorn deer, which were recently reintroduced to the area. And now I will let you enjoy the video of the coyote versus cat, and then stay tuned for the last bit of trivia. Thanks. So here we have a cat and a coyote that wants the cat. And he's leaving. Thank you for watching, and the final bit of trivia. When visiting the White Cliffs, remember that it is also called Molly's Nipple. Now, let me know in the comments section why we think it's called that.